Hey, Composing Gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about texture and space in a beat from a compositional perspective. So we're not going to be talking about mixing. We're not going to be talking about using why things sound the way they do. We might talk a little bit about that, but for the most part, we're going to be talking about using these things compositionally. How do I have them interact with my song from a sound perspective as one of the 5 major elements of my song. So this is a breakdown sort of in the sound area of our 5 major elements. So first we're going to talk about texture, and I have an example here in FL, and with this, I'm going to use this one for space, and then I have an example here in Renoise. I'm going to use this one for texture because I think it demonstrates a property quite nicely. So let's back up for texture for a bit. So let's talk about texture as you more formally know it as when you touch something. What is the texture? So if you were to like touch your skin, maybe your hand or whatever, and you feel the texture of your skin, and then you touch your shirt, and your shirt feels really, really different. Now, let's say that we are creating a piece of art where texture is an integral part of our art. We could introduce them to a smooth surface, something that's like a tile. And then we can introduce them to a grainier surface. Maybe we put sandpaper there, but only momentarily. And then we put a smooth surface back so that they get the contrast of the smooth surface with the contrast of the texture of the sandpaper. And this can create a very pleasurable experience. Not necessarily pleasurable, but a very much more aware experience. Because now you're like, wow, this is so much smoother now. Not necessarily because it got any smoother, but because now I have something to compare it to. And so when we use texture in music, it doesn't necessarily have to be as crazy as going from sandpaper to a smooth tile, but it is going from having perhaps maybe some clarinets playing a chord and then having the flutes come in for a moment and share their sound with the clarinets and then go away. And by doing this and doing it skillfully, you create a really nice sense of texture in your music, and it makes the listener appreciate tones and sounds more in your song. Classical music does this excellently. Well, contemporary classical. If you're going to like Baroque period, it's way more harmony based and stuff, but you get the idea. If you listen to like a choir, really, really good choir, they'll have really good use of texture. So here I have a couple sounds, and I'm just going to show you this right here. So I have this little bass line and things. It's a work in progress, but I have this here ARP that fades in and out. So it sounds like this. So you see it's coming in and out like it's going in and out. It's contributing momentarily to the song. So it brings in an element of texture. It's a background element, and it's an element of texture. Now what it doesn't do is it doesn't contribute to a sense of space near as well. It definitely has elements that contribute to space, but that's not its primary concern. Its primary concern here is a textual concern. And you've seen lots of beats earlier in the series where I'll bring strings in and out. That's a texture move. I'm a big fan of texture. I like texture a lot. And so this guy over here, this little bell, like dun 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 dun, that's playing the chords. This is a sense of space. So this gives you a sense of space. But I haven't mixed it either. And during the mixing stage, I often make dramatic changes to my sense of space. So let's go over to space. So that's texture, and I just want you to be aware of texture. My challenge to you this time is going to be create a beat that objectively changes the listener's sense of space and use texture skillfully in it. So get used to bringing tones in and out. You may go find one sound, bring that one sound in, and just fade it in and out ever so slightly for just one moment, just to vary up the texture. And so a lot of times texture will have the same note. In this particular case in Renoise, it played an entire chord. That's totally fine, but that's because it pretty much is a single note, but the chord is playing super fast. So let's go ahead and jump over to an example of space. So space is generated from 3 primary things. So the first one is the biggest one is rests. So just the absence of notes. By having an absence of note, you will give the listener a chance to observe the room by itself. And so that is a very, very powerful move. It's often very emotional because it's often has implications with the phrase as well and the theme of the piece. So pieces that tend to be quiet and have more rooms like that. I'm sure you could think of anything. Just think soft piano music. People think it's relaxing, but you could also use this in very dramatic pauses. It creates a very good sense of space. The other senses of space, there are two other sort of big ones. That is delay and reverb, and those come from the sound after it's occurred. So how long does it reverberate in the room? And then delay is like a flavor of reverb, sort of. It's not really the same thing. It's like echoes. So if you were to go in a room and scream, and you would probably hear reverb, but if you were in a cannon and screamed, you'd probably hear echoes of your scream, which means they would sound like your scream or repeatedly. And so you can use that to create a really clean space in your track, but at the same time, it might not create the kind of space you want, which reverb might be a better flavor, but then reverb can make your track sound very muddy. On the flip side, if you have a really muddy track, but you still want a big sense of space, you could use it to, you could maybe have your high end ring out a little bit longer while your low end's really busy, and the listener could use the high end to get the clue for the space. And so you can do all sorts of tricks. So these are all like sort of mixing moves, which I said I'm not going to talk about. So we're going to jump into using it compositionally. So I'm going to assume you know a little bit about reverb and delay. So how can I use it creatively? Well, this is a deep house track. It's a track. It's actually been published. It's called Is This Wonderland? And in it, I have this chord phrase. And it starts out, I'm using a filter to take away the high frequencies, giving the impression that it is far away. And then I let the high frequencies through, the delay increases, giving the impression that it's gotten closer, but the room has also somehow gotten larger. Like it's just a weird feeling of space. And I'm using dynamic spatial cues. So the mixing series and the critical listening series, mixing and critical listening, are the series you want to check out if this is all black voodoo magic to you. But I'm going to go ahead and play it for you, and I want you to specifically pay attention to how the sense of space changes throughout the synth little chord progression here. And you see how here I'm using rest to give the listener a clear opportunity to hear the room. And so here you go. So you see it came up very forward and then it fades back away. That's the idea of this piece. So that's what I'm challenging you to sort of do. This is a deep house track, so it's not got that craziness going on. Occasionally there's also a ring when I play this. I'm not sure what's causing the ring, but the ring isn't supposed to be there. I'm not going to worry about it right now though. So I'm using space. You see here it came very forward and then it disappeared back into the background by the use of a filter. The delay increased, and we saw that we experienced a very cool sense of space. We can also use pads. Now, space on long elements, the long elements to sustain, such as brass instruments, sort of usually have a fourth thing going for them, and it's the way they generate sound. So if I were to open up a harmor, I could have something that we know would sound like, let's say I have just a saw wave. Because it's just going to come out blaringly loud. But one of the things that makes things sound loud is the way they develop over time and the way they get loud. So if we were to, so this is immediately loud. And because it happens so fast, our brain actually can't process how fast it is. It's just suddenly loud. We could also have it get loud over time. And it's the reason brass instruments can sound so loud is we have the ability to ramp in. So we're able to experience the shift from soft to loud. And that also will give us, generally, it's not a sense of space, but it will interact with the space you're working in. And that will cause it to send out more spatial cues than something that's immediately loud. For something that gets immediately loud, you don't get how big it is until you're partway through the loudness or the sound is stopped and you're hearing the reverb and the delay. So having something that gets loud, not immediately, not like bang, like within 20 milliseconds is as loud as it can go. That is a valuable thing because you get more spatial cues. You get a little more accurate of a reading of how loud this thing is earlier on in your listening experience. This is sort of a brain experience thing. And then now brass instruments can stop dead, but we just learned that we're concerned mostly with this front end. Because they could stop and bang, and when they stop, we get a clear sense of the space that's left after they've stopped. And so that gives us a really good cue of space, but this also gives us an excellent cue of space. Now, on the flip side, if we have a very transient sound, they are going to lend themselves to revealing space by happening mega quick. We're not going to really get a feel for how loud they were in a true sense because they happen so fast that our brain actually can't process it. There's a point where they get so loud that instead of getting any louder, the character of the sound changes. It's one of those weird things that happens with our ears just because our ears function on a mechanical level. So, but what we can get from it is all the space that's left over. So when it hits, it's going to reverberate in the room. We'll hear it. Think of like impulse responses for convolution engines. That's a reverb thing. If you don't know what that is, go look up convolution reverb. But think of like that. So those are really great ways to do that. So here in this piece, I've got a sound that's not terribly long, but because it echoes and delays out, we get a really good sense of space. But now you might be wondering, how does reverb and how does space get revealed with sounds that are very long and sustaining? And the answer is, if it sounds blurry, if it's not clear and crisp, it's going to sound far away. And also depends on the frequency content. If it's got a lot of high-end content, it will generally sound much closer. Now, if it has a lot of low-end content, but it's missing the high-end, it'll sound full, large, and like it's in a huge room. So here I try to take advantage of that by mixing together the various frequencies, but also compositionally, I bring in a low, big sort of tone, and it provides me a great sense of space. And compositionally, that is the effect that I wanted. It was a compositional move. It wasn't a mixing move. I wasn't sitting there going, oh, I need this great big tone to mix in, la, 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 la. Like it's all composition. So I'll play it from right here, and you will hear the tone come in. And you will now that I've directed your attention, you will now shift your attention to the change in space of the track. So you get the idea. That's sort of a big space. There's lots of tracks that use a sense of space like this. You also notice I use repetitive tones that we actually looked at this in the last video, but a repetitive tone. And it's a short tone and it's got a delay on it, and its sole job is to give you a sense of space and outline a little bit of the harmony that I chose. Just outline the key a little bit. And so that's sort of what a lot of deep house is just about, is just having really smooth, easy transitions, but spatial cues, manipulating the sense of space, bringing things in and out, and experiencing different spaces is a big part of the genre. And so that's my challenge to you. Make a beat, use space and texture interestingly. So this is also a textural move as well. It comes in, its sole job is you can hear parts where whenever it has a note change, it also sort of emphasizes a textural change as well as a harmonic change. But I think I gave you pretty good examples of the properties that you can use here. And I chose this one because this is one of my older tracks. It's very simple in nature. You don't need anything terribly complicated to play with these ideas. And that's sort of what makes the genre fun. If you throw in too many sounds, it takes away from the listener. Like, they have to think about too much else. And so you can't experience the space as fully as you would be able to just by having just a few elements and having them carefully observe the movements of each one. Sort of a minimalistic idea. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.